All right. Thank you everyone for joining us today for our Memories from Rohwer panel. My name is Yoko Fedorenko. I'm a Yonsei based in Seattle, Washington. I'm on Nikkei Rising, the youth branch of JAMP, and I'm also a member of the Minidoka Pilgrimage Planning Committee. And I'm really excited to dive into our conversation today. We have two wonderful panelists. June Berk and Lois Morishita, who also happens to be my grandma. So I'm really excited to get to hear from you guys about your experiences at Rohwer. Before we get started with that, I wanted to give each of you a chance to quickly introduce yourselves and give the audience a little bit of background so they can better understand your story. So could you each tell us where you live now, where you lived before being incarcerated, and how old you were when you arrived at Rohwer? June, do you want to go first?
Okay. I was born here in Los Angeles, California, and I was living here to the age of 10 when we were evacuated and evicted from our home, and we were sent to Santa Anita Assembly Center. My sister and brother were attending Belmont High School, and I was attending Dayton Heights Elementary School in Hollywood, California.
Grandma, do you want to tell us, let's see, how old you were, where you were living, and where you live now?
Okie doke. Hi, everyone. My name is Lois Morishita, formerly Yasuda. I was born in Los Angeles. From Los Angeles, I was taken to Santa Anita also. And we were in the stables. It was just wonderful with the smell of horse manure. My mother was ill, and so we got to move out of the stables into the barracks. We were one of the fortunate ones. After camp, I went to Chicago, where I went to high school. I'm currently living in San Pedro, California.
And Grandma, how old were you when you arrived at Rohwer?
I'm not really positive. I think I was 11.
Cool. All right. So now that we have some background, we're kind of going to go sort of chronologically. So I was wondering if you guys have memories about what happened immediately following Pearl Harbor, if you remember anything about hearing about the attack or how you were treated after that, anything just in that period before camp. Either of you can go. Grandma, I know that you had, there was a boy at school who wasn't very nice to you.
I was just thinking about him. I cannot erase that from my mind. There was a boy who I used to play with a lot. He was a good friend, and he was cute, which has nothing to do with the story. But when I went back to school after Pearl Harbor Day, I don't know what he was talking about or who he was talking to, but he pointed to me and he said, "That Jap girl over there." It's a memory I can never erase because he was my friend.
Yeah. June, do you have any memories about how you were treated immediately after Pearl Harbor?
My parents were having a Buddhist prayer meeting at our house from Koyasan. That was the Buddhist church that they belonged to. And the news came on the radio, and we were all standing around the radio listening to the broadcast. And as the bombs were falling, we were hearing that, Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor. And my parents and our friends were shocked. They didn't know what was going around, and they were just very scared. And then just about that time, there was a knock on our door, and two FBI men knocked on our door, and they came inside, and they asked for the Buddhist priest to come with them, to get his hat and come with them. At that time, I didn't know, I found out later in life, there was a proclamation 2525 that arrested all Japanese men, aliens, and they took them to Tuna Canyon. And I'm working with Tuna Canyon right now. But any Buddhist priest, Japanese school teacher, kendo, martial arts teacher, they were all picked up that day or right after then in the weeks following. So that was my first day after Pearl Harbor. My mother kept me home from school for about a week. She was afraid to let me go to school. Then after that, we went. I had no problems going to school, but on the way home, there was a girl, we would pass by her house and she would yell at us and be very angry with us. But other than that, you know, I felt pretty safe.
Grandma, your dad was also a leader, right?
He was a Tenrika priest.
Mm-hmm. Was he taken?
My father and mother had a dry cleaning business in LA, and we saw a car parked across the street from very early with two men sitting in it who later came to the door, and they were FBI men. They searched the house. We lived behind the dry cleaning shop, and very early that morning, well, when the call came that Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor, there was so much buzzing going on. People were calling my dad, and he had been kind of a community leader. He spoke fluent English, and so people came to him to I can't think of the word. You know, they received letters from Japan, and if they had an English document, they'd have him come and translate it to Japanese. And these men said, "What were you burning in the incinerator at 6:30 this morning?" Well, my parents had taken out their photos from Japan and pictures of the emperor and empress, etc. we burned in the incinerator. And I was this little thing, but I remember speaking up and I said, it was just our everyday trash.
Wow.
But they told him to pack a suitcase. And my mother said, what should I pack? Where will you be taking him? And they said, we don't know. We were just told to pick him up. So she packed whatever. I don't know what she packed, but they took him and he spent the night in the county jail. And he went from there to Tuna Canyon. My sister was going through some records they had at the Japanese Museum, and she found his name listed among those at Tuna Canyon.
Oh, I didn't even know that. Okay, that's interesting.
And from there, he was taken to New Mexico.
And then for both of you, when did you see your fathers again? How long was it?
My father came back while we were still in Santa Anita.
Oh, okay.
So it couldn't have been too long.
Mm-hmm.
And he was standing in the back of a truck. All these men were standing. It was an open truck, and they came driving in. And that was the first sight we had of our dad.
What about you, June? Do you remember when your father rejoined you?
No, my father was not taken. Just the Buddhist priest was taken from our house.
Oh, okay.
But as I'm working for Tuna Canyon Legacy Project, we're interviewing people, the descendants of people who were taken to Tuna Canyon. So, Lois, I'm going to be calling you. I'd like to interview you for our Tuna Canyon archives.
I really remember. I don't know anything about it.
Well, you know, unfortunately, all the men who were in Tuna Canyon are no longer alive.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very rare that we find a daughter or even a son. Mostly we have to talk to grandchildren. So Lois, you're one of the very few that I can talk to.
Grandma, do it. That's
So
cool.
this is a really a great surprise to me. I didn't know Lois's father was in Tuna Canyon. And so we are doing some work for the National Archives. And we got a grant from the National Park Service, Japanese confinement sites, and we have been doing the Legacy Project interviews for Tuna Canyon.
That's amazing, Grandma. You should do that. That's so cool that you're doing that work, June. I wanted to kind of move forward chronologically and talk about actually arriving at Rohwer. So I know both of you were at Santa Anita. Do you remember anything about the journey to Arkansas or anything about like your first impressions when you arrived at Rohwer? If it like met your expectations or what you thought or felt about the whole thing?
Well, we had no idea where we were headed. It just seemed desolate.
What about you, June? Do you remember anything about your first thoughts?
Yeah, I was really excited. This was my first train ride I've ever been on, and so I was really looking forward to it. And I remember crossing over the Rio Grande River, and it seemed like it took us days and days to go from Santa Anita to Rohwer, Arkansas. And I remember going through Texas, and my brother was one of the train monitors for our car, so he was able to get off the train and buy candies and magazines for us.
Wow.
And at night, he says he would go back to the dining car, and he and the waiters and the people that worked on the train, they all had jam sessions and parties back there. So
my gosh.
he enjoyed the train ride. So he was 16 at the time. And so since he was a young man, they made him a train monitor. I remember that. So we had a nice train ride to Arkansas, and I think they took us off the train, and then they put us on trucks and took us on trucks from the train station to Rohwer, Arkansas. And all I remember are the really, really poor houses that almost look like outhouses where people lived. And I thought, oh my God, these people live in such poverty. I felt sorry for them. And then when we got to camp, it was a nice surprise because, you know, after being 5 months in the horse stables in Santa Anita, we got to move into fresh new barracks. And so we thought, wow, this is great. So we were happy.
Do you have any specific memories of what you did either just for fun in camp, being a kid, or what school was like, or just anything about how you felt throughout those years?
I remember school at Santa Anita. It was in the grandstand. And for PE, we walked around the racetrack.
And then at Rohwer, the school, was it just in another barrack? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They had one block just made for junior high school, one block for elementary school, and one block for high school. And first I was in the 5th grade, the 6th grade, and in the 7th grade, I was able to go to junior high. That was really exciting to be able to go to junior high school. But in the meantime, our parents really, really were so good to us. I remember a man making seesaws for us, and I still have a picture of my friend Angela Yamashita and I on the seesaw that we played on almost every day in our block. And they made us stilts to play on, and we would play volleyball in the evening after dinner. And that, so I think the adults and the parents really tried to make our lives as normal and as fun as possible. So we were lucky in that way.
Mm-hmm. Grandma, can you tell the story of how you and your friends snuck out of camp?
Oh yeah. We made friends with the guards. There was a guard tower with soldiers in them with rifles. But we were kids, and so we somehow made friends with them. And there was barbed wire all around, but there was an area where the barbed wire was not taut. It was loose. And so we thought we could sneak out of the camp. And I think the soldiers had to know what we were doing, but they turned their backs. And we did sneak out, and we kept walking down this dirt road, and we came to a so-called store. The store really didn't have much, but there was a refrigerated box with soda in it. We must have had a little bit of money because we bought a soda, and we crawled back, went back to camp, and there was no, no one reported us.
You got away with it.
No one shot us.
Lois, I wonder if we went out together, because I remember stretching the barbed wires and sneaking out, waving to the guard, hi and bye. And we walked down, you said, the dirt road, and we played in the swamps. And the boys would pick up snakes and throw it at us girls.
Oh.
And then we walked to the store that you're talking about in Rohwer. And I remember asking the man, do you have any ice cream? And he said, we don't sell ice cream. And I thought, oh my God, we could buy ice cream in camp. But the people, I guess, were so poor that lived around there that they didn't sell ice cream. So then we walked back to camp along that dirt road, and then we just pulled the wires apart again and just snuck back in. I don't think our parents ever missed us.
What grades were each of you in when you were in camp?
I was in 7th, 8th, and 9th. I graduated from junior high.
Okay. June, what about you?
I was in the 5th, 6th, and 7th grade. So.
I was wondering if you guys, maybe June, you could go first. If you could share a little bit about your family and what you remember about your parents. I know you talked about how, they worked really hard to make the kids' lives better in camp. But could you share a bit about what your family's situation was and what you remember about them?
Yes. My father was teaching this gidayu, which is like a kabuki music with the shamisen, and the songbooks are from the 17th century, really old. And I would be dancing with my dance teacher, Fujima Kansuma, and we would perform in the camps. And we even traveled to Jerome to dance. And Lois, did you take dance lessons from Kansuma?
No, I never did.
And then my friend, remember Takayo? Do you remember Takayo? She used to teach us how to do baton twirling.
I do remember her. She always stood out.
Right. So she would teach us baton twirling. And so at football games, we would be like majorettes at the football games and perform at football games. But we used to do Japanese dancing, and my father was a teacher of this shamisen and gidayu, and my mother was, I think she was babysitting other mothers, because I have pictures of my mother holding other babies and in camp, and then my mother and father, I never saw them angry or upset or sad. They just, my father was very, very, he was always grateful for everything. And I think he used to tell us to always be grateful for everything. So my brother was working for the commissary, so he would deliver food, but he had to go to McGee every day to buy ice for the camp. So they would hang out in town because they were the last ones to get waited on. So they would go to either the movies or go shopping or do walk around town. And he used to also say how it was so prejudiced in McGee, Arkansas, also. And so he was really surprised about that. My other brother, my oldest brother, signed up and volunteered for the 442. So he was gone. So we had a blue star in our window because we had somebody in the army and serving with the 442. So I remember that. And I remember the letter he wrote to my mother going overseas. And I think that was the saddest day of our lives. He was one of the lucky ones to come home.
Oh, thank you for sharing. I think it's so interesting. I feel like the one way, like I've done so many of these panels, and one way like to get people talking, it brings up so many memories just asking about people's parents and families, because those are the people that like really kept you grounded and like kept you going during those days. I wanted, Grandma, would you mind sharing a little bit about your mother and father, and what you had to go through with your mother in camp?
Well, my mother died in camp. She was ill. She died of tuberculosis, which, being so young, I was ashamed to share that with people because TB was not something to be proud of having in your family. And my friend Betty Wakamatsu was more mature and wiser. And when people ask me, what did she die of? Because I don't know how long I was kept home from school, but as soon as I went back, everyone knew my mother had passed on, and they came to me and asked what caused her to die. And I said, I don't know. And Betty, in all her mature wisdom, said, my father told me it was tuberculosis. When I was talking about my mother, the vision came to me of my sister, my kid sister. She's 5 years younger than I. And our mother was in this casket, and we had to each go up, of course, and say a blessing or whatever. And when my sister Susie went up, she just stood there in front of the casket. It was the most pathetic sight. She wouldn't move. And in the end, a couple old ladies went over and brought her back to sit down. It was really heart-wrenching because she was a mom.
And she wasn't she like quarantined in a separate area from you in camp because of her illness?
Not really. She should have been, I think.
Oh,
And
okay.
we couldn't visit her in camp.
Mm.
My father, having this Tenrikyo church, always had, he always took in some bachelors who had no place to live and let them stay at the church. And so they were living in the church when the war broke out. And when they consequently moved with us. And so we had 2 units in the barrack, and they were housed the 2 bachelors were in the same room as my parents.
Oh.
And then in the other unit were my 2 sisters and I and our grandfather.
I think we are almost ready to wrap up this portion and move on to audience questions. But before we do, I just wanted to quickly give you both a chance to share just a little bit about where you went immediately after camp, because people might have questions about that. So I want to get some info from you guys. So can each of you just quickly, before we move on, just share where you went after camp and maybe a little bit about what you or your family did or how you were treated? June, do you want to go first?
My my parents had friends in Denver, Colorado, so that's where we moved from camp. They were operating the Umeya Rice Cake Company and also the Mikawaya Manju store in Denver. And so we went there, and then eventually my brother learned how to make manju, and we took over the store. So we were in Denver until 1953 when we moved back to Los Angeles. So I think going to Denver for me, it was harder for my parents because they had to start all over again. And I think that's true with most parents. They had to start all over again. But I think I was so sad to leave camp because it was so much fun with all my friends, and I didn't want to leave my friends. So it was sort of a sad leaving camp, and yet, you wonder what's going to happen to you on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing we did when we went to junior high school in Denver, Colorado, some of the girls asked me, "Oh, where'd you go? Where'd you come from?" And I said, "Oh, I was in camp." And they would say, "Oh, what summer camp did you go to?" That was the question that they would ask me. What summer camp did you go to? So they had no knowledge that we were in a concentration camp.
Mm-hmm. Grandma, what about you? Can you just share a little bit about where you guys went right after camp?
Well, we went to Chicago, and that's where I went to high school. Our first apartment, I remember we couldn't be all together in the same apartment. And Japanese people owned the building.
Oh.
Yeah.
Do you remember anything about like how people reacted to you guys showing up in Chicago?
I don't remember any horrible experience.
I think there was less prejudice Midwest and East than there was in the West Coast.
Maybe
Before
so.
we left, before the war, we had a lot of prejudice against the Japanese in California, and that's probably why we were kicked out of California.
Mm-hmm.
But my sister got married to her boyfriend that she met in camp.
Oh.
And they lived in Detroit, Michigan, and she raised her 3 children there, and her grandchildren are still there in Michigan.
Oh,
So I think, I think they had a really nice life after camp
Mm.
in the Midwest area. And I know that Denver, Colorado, we didn't face any prejudice or anything like that, racist problems like that.
Mm.
I don't, at least I don't remember any that we came across.
Okay, well, I think we are going to now transition to the live Q&A portion. So thank you, Grandma. Thank you, June, for doing this. This was so cool to hear from you guys. And if you do have any questions for June or Lois or both, just drop them in the chat and we will get to them. We'll hopefully be able to answer as many as we can. So thank you, everybody. Hi, everyone. All right, so now we're going to take some questions from the audience. I see we already have one question lined up. So this is from Jim. And is June frozen? Oh, there you are. Okay. So there's a question from Jim, and the question is, most pictures we see of the camps are in the desert, but I've seen pictures of Rohwer in the trees. Were the barracks in the forest or under the trees?
we were surrounded by trees, I think.
Like in the actual within the camp?
I
or
don't remember
on the
trees growing in the camp.
outside?
Do you, June? The people, our parents among them, were grew things to beautify the area.
June, can you hear us?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, she's there. Okay, cool. Do you remember what kind of the natural setting of the camp was? Was there trees or desert or?
Yes, I think block 2 and block 3, block 14, where we were living, there were no big trees, but further down into the camp, around blocks 7 or 9, they were closer and surrounded by trees.
Mhm.
I remember that there was a lot of rain and a lot of mosquitoes around, and people would go, um, especially the men, would go hunting for these tree stumps in the wooded area and bring back tree stumps, which they would make into beautiful carvings of artwork. And some of that is art in the museums now. But we had a teacher on our block, Mr. Koizumi, who taught men how to whittle and make these beautiful carvings. So I know that sometimes men would get lost in the forest area because you could go outside of the camp there for a little while. I mean, for a little ways, but not too far.
Looks like we have another question from the audience. Carrie Matsuo wants to know if you guys know their in-laws, George and Betty Matsuo from camp. Does that ring any bells?
Yeah, I do not.
June, what about you?
No, that ring. I'm sorry that the name doesn't ring a bell, but I remember there was a Hirosuna. Somebody asked me about Hirosuna, and I said I know Eva Hirosuna. I wonder if Eva Hirosuna was related to. I think one of.
She's my brother-in-law's sister.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. Somebody asked me if we knew Hirosuna.
So, so my great aunt who Lois was saying wouldn't leave the casket and was standing in front of her. She's my grandma's little sister. She married a Hirosuna. She married my uncle Dickie. So yeah, it's a small world. Let's see. We have another question. Did you both have your meals with your own friends or with your families in camp?
That's one of the things that was very hard on families because families did not get to share their meals. Kids just kind of went with their friends, and in that way, I think the parents kind of lost. I heard of some families that ate together in their own barracks, but I didn't know any personally, and we did not do that.
What about you, June?
I mostly ate with my friends. We have to eat at certain times, and they would ring a dinner gong bell, and we'd have to line up. If it's raining, we line up in the rain, and then you're served in a cafeteria style, and then there are like picnic bench areas where you all sit down. So it's true what Lois said. Most of the time, I ate with my friends, and before the war, Japanese families are very structured in that it's usually the father who sits down at the table first, and then the children sit down, and then the father is served first, and then the children are served their food, and then the mother sits down last, and if there's any food left, she gets that food. But um, so the father was always the head of the household, and you had to really be careful because he would get you would get scolded if you did anything wrong. But in camp, a lot of fathers lost that power because they were no longer the breadwinner. And children like me, we all ate with our friends. And I hardly ever ate with my family. I don't remember.
Hmm. Yeah, I've heard a lot about how that was something that kind of screwed with the family dynamic and stuff. Okay, it looks like we have a question from Susan Hirasuna. Hi, Tinker. So she wants to know, did you have much interaction with the locals outside of camp? Consuma told me she was taken out of the camp with some students as some sort of way to introduce Japanese culture to the area. Wait, Grandma, you went and stayed overnight outside of camp, right?
Yes, that was the most exciting time I had, I think. I don't recall really if it was a YWCA organization or if there was some religious affiliation. I don't remember, but some of us got to go to Little Rock and stay in the homes of locals who lived there and were willing to house, one or two of us. And it was just the biggest thrill because I can still remember the feeling of sleeping in this beautiful big bed with lovely comforters, and it was so cozy, and it just felt luxurious to me.
Hmm. What about you, June? Do you remember ever interacting with the locals?
Yes, well, here's a picture of our dance teacher, Fujima Kansuma. And some of us students, we went to Jerome camp to dance. And I had a picture of it here somewhere. But yes, they wanted us to raise the morale of the Issei's, the first generation in camp. So they allowed us to do Japanese dancing and shamisen and kabuki. So we had regular performances in camp, and also my dance teacher, Fujima Kasuma, also traveled to all the other camps to dance and perform. And I heard that in Amachi, they even built an outdoor stage for her
Oh,
to dance because there was such a demand to see her dance on stage. So I just recently met some of the dancers from our class in Rohwer, and Lois, were you one of her students?
I'm afraid not.
So we later on, after Kansuma left, there was another teacher, Lily Uematsu, who taught, and we performed in the new auditorium. And there was Patricia Uno and some of the other girls from Takayo Tsuboichi performed there. So we had a large, large auditorium, and the parents made the backdrop scenery drawings, and the mothers all made these flowers that hung down from the ceiling, and it was a whole community experience.
Very cool. This kind of leads nicely when you talk about the mothers making little flowers. This next question, it says from Fuji Design in yesterday's session, so that must have been with Delphine Hirasuna. We heard about the wonderful art that was created in camp. Did either of you create any kind of art, do any crafts in camp?
I'm afraid not.
What about you, June?
We used to take our old, we used to take watermelon seeds and cantaloupe seeds, and we would wash them and dry them, and then we would string it like this on a needle and thread, and then we would paint them with our fingernail polish, and we would make necklaces and bracelets, and then out of peach seeds we would make rings, and we would somebody would make a hole for us, and then we would sand the peach seed down to make ourselves rings. And then even on little wooden spoons out of ice cream cups, people would paint on it. And so we did a lot of projects with our art.
It sounds like you led a different life in camp than I did, June. It almost sounds like you went to summer camp.
Sometimes it's not like that.
Well, Grandma, what did you do like in your free time?
She studied.
I'm afraid not.
You didn't
I
study?
mooned over movie stars. I loved Alan Ladd.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
And it's terrible to say, but I don't remember having much fun.
You, Lois, you were supposed to will your Alan Ladd picture in junior high to the 7th and 8th graders, and what happened to that?
I said I could never part with them. I still have.
She does. But Grandma, going back to like the question about the art, didn't you say that your dad did like whittling or something?
He did. He made some things out of cypress knees. That's what the men collected, and they made some beautiful things. We had a pen stand that my dad had made, and we had that for many years. We no longer do, but he made it was a cat sitting on the stand for the pen, and kind of a stylized cat, and it was just so smooth and beautiful.
I wish that we still had that. That sounds so cool.
Yeah.
I have a question for you guys. I think that it's so amazing to hear from you and see how open you both are, like about your experiences and stuff. And I know that for a lot of people that wasn't always the case. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about like how you got to this place. Like, were you always really open with talking to your family about camp, or was there anything that catalyzed that, or like do you first remember opening up?
I think for me, your mother, Leslie, was instrumental in opening things up a lot. She was bound and determined to show her girls where the culture and so on that they came from. And so she made it a point to expose them to a lot of, to this day, their family has a big Japanese New Year. They do all the cooking and they learned a lot of how to make a lot of the dishes from the Hirosuna cookbook.
Yeah, I know my mom, yeah, she definitely made it a point that we should ask you guys about what you had gone through so we could better understand, where we come from and stuff. June, do you remember when you first started talking about this stuff, or were you always so open?
I'm sorry. I was reading the questions, and somebody wanted to know where we got our clothes from Sears Roebuck, and I was reading that, and I missed your question. But
Oh, I was just asking if you remember like the process or how you got to a place where you're so open about your experiences, or was it something you always talked about with your family, or is it a more recent thing?
after coming out of camp, your friends are all from camp. You're
Right.
you're either from your camp or from other camps, and so we were always talking about camp.
Mhm.
Our experiences in camp, and we would have clubs. Even I know Chicago had a lot of clubs. In Denver we had one club of just girls from the camps, and so we were always talking about camp. And I think it's always the memories that we had of our friends, and I don't think we talked too much about the conditions that we had in camp, but
Mhm.
mostly about our friends and remembering people and the dances and the things that we did in camp. And the funny
I
thing
think
was clothing that we had to buy. We had to buy certain clothes from the Sears catalog, and I ended up. There was a girl named Shirley Horikiri in my grammar school, and another girl. I think we all wore the same three dresses to school all the time because that was one of the dresses that we were allowed to buy. And then I had on a pair of shoes, and the boy sitting next to me had on the same pair of shoes, and we would argue. You've got on boy shoes, or you've got on girl shoes. And I remember Lois had a story about her shoes too that she had to wear
they were
from.
so mistaking that those were boys' shoes. They had that big wingtip. They were brown and ugly.
And the plaid thing from Sears.
Well, I think they dumped a lot of stuff that they couldn't sell
Mm.
because we would order things, but we didn't necessarily get what we ordered. And many people had the same, you're talking about that plaid outfit with a vest and skirt. It was a red plaid, an ugly plaid, and so many girls had that
I remember
outfit.
even oh, you go. I was just gonna say my mom said she remembers trying to buy something when she was a kid, and it reminded you too much of the
Yeah.
plaid Sears thing you had to wear in camp, and you said, "I can't even look at that. You can't get that." Sticks with you. Let's see. We have some more questions. Ken Mochizuki is asking, in other camps in the desert, flowers were made of paper. Did you find real flowers at Rohwer?
Some people grew flowers.
Oh, right.
but I don't know about wildflowers.
My mother grew flowers in camp, and we had morning glories and night glories. But I do remember that whenever there was a funeral, Lois, do you remember people making crepe paper flowers for your mother's funeral service? I know that was a popular thing to do. Is that whenever there was any like a funeral or wedding, something like that, that we had to make our own paper flowers out of crepe paper because there was no flowers really around.
Hmm. Grandma, do you remember if they had real flowers at your mother's funeral?
I don't even remember flowers,
Oh, okay.
but I could be blocking things.
Hmm.
People were
Okay.
kind enough to come to attend.
Yeah. And it was in a barrack?
Each block had a barrack at the end. It was just a big barrack, which was used for, like sometimes they were used to show a movie.
Mm.
Where I first saw Alan Ladd.
Oh, a pivotal moment in your life.
Yes.
It looks like we have a question from Janice, who wants to know if either of you remember Paul Shimokubo, who taught math in camp.
No, I'm not familiar with that name. There were a lot of Niseis who were teachers also, besides the teachers that were actually hired from the surrounding areas.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them, there was a Mr. Abe. I remember Mr. Abe, who was our art teacher, but the name Shimabukuro doesn't ring a bell with me. I don't know.
With me either.
Mm. Do you remember anything else about like school, like the actual learning part? Like, did you feel like you were getting a good education while you were in Rohwer?
I don't think I ever thought about it. Am I getting a good education? I was so immature, I was young and.
Well, you skipped a grade, right, Grandma?
In elementary school.
Oh, right. What about you, June? Do you remember that? I feel like I hear a lot about school, but I feel like I've not heard a lot about the school part of school. Do you know what I mean? Do you remember anything about that?
Yes, I had a sixth grade teacher. Her name was Mrs. Fox, and she was really a good English teacher, teaching us sentence structure and diagramming sentences. And I really thank her for being such a good teacher because that's where I learned my English sentence structure. And we had good teachers. I know a lot of teachers who really cared for us. Mrs. Ziegler in junior high school. I remember her. I think Lois remembers her also.
I remember her also. And her husband, Mr. Ziegler, was the principal of I think the elementary school.
Right.
They were wonderful people.
Yes. So we had good teachers, but I remember we had a Japanese Nisei teacher. Her name was Tabuchi, Tabuchi, and the other teachers would murder her name because they had this thick Southern drawl, and I think a lot of us even took on English names because they had a hard time pronouncing our Japanese names.
Mm. Oh, I see in the comment that Jim Tabuchi, that's his aunt that you're talking
really?
Oh,
She
how about that?
I got to tell the story. Miss Tabuchi was our sixth grade teacher, and the boys used to make these big, huge baseball-sized mud balls out of the mud that because it's always raining, and they would throw it at us girls as we're going home from school. And once they made this huge one that looked like almost size of a basketball, and they hung it over the door with a string. And as the girls would walk in, it would fall on our heads.
Oh,
Well, here comes Miss Tabuchi. And everybody's sitting there wondering what's going to happen when she opens the door and walks through. Will that big ball of mud hit her on the head? So she opens the door and the mud ball falls in front of her, and she just steps right over it and walks to her desk. It happened. The boys are so disappointed. And we were laughing, but she was so smart and she was such a good teacher. I loved her.
Oh, that's so great.
I also have some teachers I remember. Unfortunately, I don't recall the name, but there was a science teacher who was just wonderful. And Betty Wakamatsu and she lived in block 14, and we went to her house. She was newly married, and her husband was there, and Betty's father came looking for us when we were on our way home. He said, I was going to call the police because I didn't know where you girls were.
But you were with your teacher?
We were with the teacher. Well,
not necessarily being a rebel.
She should have probably sent us home, but she was probably too nice.
Well, it's so nice that there were adults around that cared so much about you guys.
I remember Betty Wakamatsu and her brother Harold was in my class, and there was
were a bunch of kids.
Yeah, Toshiko Kusumoto and the Kusumoto family that lived in Block 3, and Kazuto Hirata was Block 3, and we all used to play together.
I see. I remember that name, Kazuto.
He was your 9th grade teacher, and curly hair, and all the girls were crazy about him.
Huh? Who are we speaking?
Kazuto Hirata.
Oh, I thought he was a student.
He was your 9th grade president. I'm sorry, 9th grade president of the class.
Oh.
Right.
So, yeah, I thought he was in my class. I didn't think he was a teacher.
No, I'm sorry. I meant he was 9th grade president, not teacher.
I see.
Well, it's so great to hear all these connections. It's like such a small world.
It is.
I think that we're about out of time. So before we go, I just want to say thank you so much, June and Grandma, for doing this. I've learned so much, and I'm sure everyone who's watching has learned so much from you both. So thank you so much.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.